Hello and welcome to the Rational Black Thought Podcast. I am your host, Neale, and this is episode number 247. It's September the 13th, 2025, and our overall title is a quote from Zora Neale Hurston's somewhat autobiography, Dirt Tracks on the Road, and it is very simply just four words and one sentence, or really two sentences: "My people, my people." And so we're gonna that is our quote of the week as well, and we're gonna get into some details about what that means. And our theme for the podcast this week is going to be unity, not uniformity. Now, I do want to go ahead and talk about the agenda for today. What we have, first up is the intro. I'm going through a part of it now. We'll go through a bit more of the intro in just a minute. After that, we'll have a quote of the week, which again, as I said, is going to be Zora Neale Hurston's Dust Tracks on a Road, a quote from her. After that, we get to Unmasking the News. And as I get through this, you'll see that the order is a little bit different. So let me kind of get to some explanations on why. So I got additional feedback again from a listener that said, again, my podcasts are too long. I had been trying to get them down lower, and they have started creeping up again. So what I've decided to do is to change the overall format, and one of the changes is that I am going to put the news, unmasking the news segment first in the lineup right after the quote of the week. So that's what will happen this week. We'll have unmasking the news after the quote of the week. And the items that we have on our agenda for the news today is the Roberts Court as a political actor. The second story is the rot is inside the house. The third is the sanctuary is the crime scene. And then the last one, our good news story, is building profit with purpose. Now, the other change that I am making is I am going to alternate between strategies for Black Power and Bible study with an atheist. So I'm not going to have both of those segments each week. This week, I am starting with strategies for Black Power because I had already written that segment. I had actually already written the segment for Bible study with an atheist as well, but I feel that the content that we have for strategies for Black Power this week was more important. So this week we'll do strategies for Black Power. Next week we'll have Bible study with an atheist. After that, then we'll have reflections and call to action, and then the outro where we will close things out. So that's going to be the new format going forward. Which again is going to be unmasking the news right after the quote of the week, and then either strategies for Black Power or Bible study with an atheist, then reflections, call to action, and then the outro. So that is what we have on our agenda for today. As it relates to just the introduction, the other thing I'd like to let you know is that this podcast is about telling the truth. It's about talking about, and in this particular episode, we're going to be talking about Black unity and reflecting on the fact that one size doesn't fit all, and rejecting that one size fit all narrative. A lot of the people who are our enemies try to label us as just a single homogenous group. But that isn't Black people. Black people are diverse, and diversity is our strength, and we're going to talk about that. As we get into the news, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and drag them for their ideological judicial shenanigans. They are no longer actually a judicial branch of the government. They have acquiesced everything to the administrative branch, and to Donald Trump, and are actually now only doing his bidding. Like I said, we're going to talk about Zora Neale Hurston's wisdom, and that wisdom is that Black life is complex, vibrant, and gloriously multifaceted. And then we're going to break down some systemic BS with intellectual fire and unapologetic black perspective. So, again, what we're focused on today is community power strategies, diverse leadership, economic empowerment, and Pan African resilience. So, that's what you have to look forward to. So, I hope you continue to listen. And we will take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get to the quote of the week with Zora Neale Hurston. All right, welcome back, and welcome to the quote of the week. And we are going to talk about Zora Neale Hurston, a quote from her, and specifically from her book "Dust Tracks on the Road," which is somewhat an autobiography. And so, what we're going to talk about then is the quote, "My people, my people." And so we're going to just start the discussion this week with that quote, expounding on what Zora was, or Ms. Hurston was talking about there, was expounding on the nature of Black unity. And then we're going to continue that same theme as we go into strategies for Black power. So Zora Neale Hurston doesn't hand us a slogan. My people is not a slogan. She hands us a mirror. So in Dust Tracks on the Road, which was published in 1942, in the chapter literally titled My People, she refuses the lazy category of, quote, the Negro, and insists on the unruly, joyful, contradictory plurality of Black life. She writes, quote, I maintain that what I have been a Negro 3 times, a Negro baby, a Negro girl, and a Negro woman, end quote. And then she cuts through the social science habit of flattening us out. Quote, our lives, she says, are, quote, so diversified that there is no possible classification so chaotic that it will cover us all except my people, end quote. And so that last cry is the point. In the Black vernacular, my people can be a benediction or a side eye, affection and exasperation braided together. Hurston uses it as a radical refusal to be shrink wrapped by anyone's theory. White sociologists, Black respectability politicians, or folklorists who want our culture without our agency. She was an anthropologist trained by Franz Boas, yes, but she turned the gaze back, not collecting, quote, Negro types, but documenting a many-voiced nation. So what is Hurston actually doing with that line, my people, my people? What she is doing is, number one, rejecting the singular. There is no, quote, Negro here, end quote. If you approach Blackness like a lab specimen, you'll miss the living organism. The region, the class, shade, style, creed, gender, sexuality, diaspora, and that singular thing called you. If you are Black, you are a Black individual. Number two, she's keeping the kinship. The only category wide enough to engulf us and to engulf that kinship itself is my people. Not a demographic bucket, but a bond. My people, my people. And I say that sometimes when I say I love us, and sometimes I can't stand us. My people, my people. And then number three, she is licensing intramural critique. That is the critique of Black people within the Black culture. The phrase carries love and a frown. We get to check our own without inviting the white gaze to weaponize our flaws. That's grown folk solidarity. And what we're talking about in this sense, when we are talking to one another, we are telling those who are not us to get out of grown folks' business. we are talking about ourselves, and we may be exasperated with ourselves sometimes, our people, but that is for us to deal with and not for you. So now I want to kind of go to my exegesis as to what Hurston's statements are demanding from us now. And I'm not interested in a balanced take. I'm never interested in a balanced take. And we're going to get to that in a little bit of a little while later, because I'm going to introduce something that's not really in the topic today, but where we'll get to this. But I'm not interested in a balanced take. I'm tired of all of this whataboutism and this equating one thing with another. That's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is the truth. The truth. The truth is that essentialism is a tool of control. When enemies of black power talk about the black vote or the black culture as a monolith, it is never to empower us. It is to predict, police, and punish us. Hurston blows that up. My people says we are not a brand, we are a civilization. And that matters in three ways. First of all, strategy, not stereotype. If black life is plural, then black liberation must be polyphonic. Street organizers and startup founders, elders and Gen Z coders, union stewards and artists, believers and atheists, each is a legitimate vector of power. Respectability politics tries to stand us down to one acceptable silhouette. And Hurston says no. Build a coalition disciplined enough to win and capacious enough to hold contradictions. That's not chaos, that's anti-fragility. Systems that gain from diversity, argument, and stress. That's what we are attempting to do. Second, it matters because it is kinship with teeth. My people isn't sentimental. It isn't kinship without accountability, because that would be a trap. Hurston's tone, love laced with a side eye, authorizes us to confront the pathology because we're family, not as a performance for outsiders. The educated black middle class shunning the hood, the influencer class, and blackness for clicks, the pulpit class selling prosperity theology. I say, my people, my people. You got to stop that. I love us enough to say stop confusing proximity to whiteness with progress. Stop monetizing our pain. Stop brutalizing hierarchy. If the bond is real, the critique is an act of repair, not betrayal. And lastly, this matters because it is a Pan-African scope. Hurston grew up in Eatonville, but wrote with the eye of a world traveler. My people spans the diaspora, Lagos to London, Kingston to Chicago, Salvador to Soweto. The only category Catholic enough or universal enough to fit us everywhere is my people, my people. That means we fight voter suppression in Georgia and political extortion in Nairobi with the same strategic brain. We defend land in Brazil and ballot access in Milwaukee with the same moral spine. Afrocentricity is not nostalgic, it's logistics. And make no mistakes, this plural, stubborn blackness is exactly what reactionaries fear. Authoritarians need simple enemies. Corporations need simple markets. Media needs simple narratives. Hurston denies them all. The minute you admit that black life cannot be graphed onto one axis, you admit something even more dangerous. We will not be managed. Now, I'm an atheist, and so I'll also name the epistemology here, faith, especially the American habit of treating the Negro, so-called Negro, as a moral parable. It's a poor way to know the world. Hurston is doing empiricism from the inside. She's saying, look, listen, count, dance, argue. Don't worship an extraction of us. Engage us. That is the only way to tell the truth about black life, and therefore the only basis for strategies that work. So what do we do with my people, my people? Organize across the differences. Build tables where union organizers, a coder, a mosque elder, a queer artist, and a data scientist can plan a campaign without demanding sameness as the entry fee. Retire respectability. Outcomes over optics. We don't need to look safe to be free. We need to be powerful to be safe. And practice intramural accountability. Critique inside the house for the sake of the house. Love with standards and don't air our business to other people. And think diaspora. Fund, hire, learn, and ally across borders. Pan-Africa isn't a hashtag, it's a supply chain. It is a supply chain for goods, services, and information. Hurston's line is both embrace and summons. It says, I see the glory and the mess, the bass drum and the blue note. And still, my people, if you're looking for a single definition of blackness, you are chasing a ghost. If you're looking for a creed, here it is. Unconditional kinship, uncompromising truth, ungovernable diversity. That's the ground we stand on and the future we will build. My people, let's act like we know who we are. All right, that is it for this week's week of the quote of the week. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to get to the segment Unmasking the News, where we have several stories to go through this week. All right, welcome back and welcome to the segment Unmasking the News, where we expose the truth behind the headlines and highlight what matters for our community. So let's get to it. This week we have several stories to go through. The first up is going to be the Roberts Court as a political actor. The second, the rot is inside the house. And then the third is when the sanctuary is a crime scene. And then the last one is our good news story of building profit with purpose. So let's get to that first story. And this is SCOTUS, or the Roberts Court as a political actor. So let's strip the robes off the rhetoric. From the start of the Biden years until now, the court has not merely called balls and strikes, which is what the judicial branch is supposed to do. Instead, they have picked winners. Movement conservatives and MAGA governance is what now, that ideology is what now drives the Supreme Court. They're no longer focused on constitutional law. They're focused on what will drive their conservative ideology into the American governance in a way that it cannot be usurped. So that shows up most clearly in two pre-second term ruptures with precedent and in what the court did right after Inauguration Day. And and that was to clear the runway for a White House order aimed at birthright citizenship elimination. So first, let's talk about what happened before Trump was even in office. A couple of things. The first was the Dobbs v. Jackson women's health decision. So Roe v. Wade and Casey weren't trimmed, they were torched. The joint dissent spelled out why this wasn't law, but power. Quote, the court reverses course today for one reason and one reason only, because the composition of this court has changed. Today, the proclivities of individuals rule, end quote. And it ends with a line history will remember in that dissent, quote, with sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent, end quote. So when the Supreme Court decided that ruling, Dobbs v. Jackson, Women's Health, they eliminated any they eliminated stare decisis. They eliminated all of the rulings that had come before in the Supreme Court. And instead, they went with ideological interpretations of the law. And it's really not even that. It is clear that the law, Roe v. Wade, as a matter of fact, not just Casey, both of those were constitutional and deemed constitutional at the time. So what those two cases did, Casey diluted Roe to a bit, but still kept it in place. But they basically said that that a woman had a right over her own body. But this court decided that she did not. So it went back to reinterpret what the Constitution even meant as it related to our basic and fundamental rights. Now, the second rupture with accountability was a Trump v. United States in 2024. And that was a presidential immunity decision. By elevating so-called official acts over criminal law, the majority, and it was only the majority in the Supreme Court, rewired the Constitution's checks in real time. Justice Sotomayor did not mince words in her dissent. Quote, "In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law," end quote. And Justice Jackson's separate dissent warned plainly, quote, "With fear for our democracy, I dissent," end quote. Those aren't partisan sound bites. They're constitutional alarm bells ringing from inside the motherfucking building. That's what that is. And it is coming to fruition. So now we're into Trump's second term, and the moves tells just how the court uses procedure to shape substance. In Trump versus the CASA, which happened on June 27th, the administration's day one executive order tried to undercut birthright citizenship. District courts across the country issued nationwide injunctions halting it because it was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court stepped in, not to decide the Fourth Amendment question, but to gut universal injunctions and narrow relief to only the named plaintiffs. That choice didn't settle the merits. It made it easy for a unconstitutional policy to take effect right now for everyone that is not lucky enough to be in a plaintiff class. And I think you should take a look at what this means, because how far back are they going to go? Is it only first generation that is going to be deemed not a U.S. citizen? Or might it be second or third generation? How far back do you have to go to when your parents were not a citizen of the United States in order to deport them, or to say that they are not a citizen? So the fact of the matter is that in her dissent, Justice Sotomayor boiled it down. The court endorses the radical proposition that the president is harmed even if what he wants to do is break the law, end quote. And Justice Jackson underscored the stakes. The ruling, she said, quote, allows the executive's constitutionally dubious mandate to go into effect, though lower courts have declared it likely unconstitutional, end quote. That's the shadow docket style in broad daylight, procedure as policy. So if you're tracking the through line, it's not subtle. Before January 2025 and Trump's second term, the court erased a half a century of reproductive rights and constructed a presidential shield. Per the dissents, puts the chief executive above ordinary criminal law. After January the 25th, or January 2025, after Trump was back in office, it used remedial rulings about who gets protected by an injunction to disable nationwide blocks against a White House project targeting birthright citizenship, even as multiple lower courts had said the project violates text, history, and Wong Kim Ark, which was which was the ruling in the Supreme Court that settled birthright citizenship in the 1800s. This is not neutral craftsmanship. This is outcome selection. It is biased. It is biased judiciary, basically not even interpreting laws, but restricting the ability of the Constitution to protect us. They have thrown out the Constitution, and they now simply inject whatever they want to happen as the constitutional law. So I'll say the quiet part out loud. This majority keeps finding ways to deliver on MAGA movement priorities. That's their goal. Overturning settled law when they need to, inventing immunities when it's useful, and trimming remedial law to let contested executive programs run until someone with the right paperwork can stop them. The dissents, especially from Ketanji Brown Jackson, are the breadcrumbs for the future courts and for the public record. Read them, memorize them, because they tell you exactly what's being done in your name and what will be required to repair it. All right, so let's go on to the next story. And in this particular case, we are talking about the rot inside the house. Now, what I'm going to do in this one is actually to flip the script on an article that I read that was actually put out as a good news story. And if you're checking this out on YouTube, you see I have on the screen where you see that the MSNBC had a poll up where Rachel Maddow, and it shows that Trump's approval rating was 38%, and his disapproval rating was 60%. And so the Reuters and the Ipsos poll basically tried to say that because of his 60% disapproval, that there might be some repercussions to Trump, and therefore policies might change. But the fact of the matter is that authoritarianism thrives on partisanship plus indifference, not on consensus. So there is a consensus, yes, that Trump that disapproves of Trump, but that isn't what is going to change things. Trump is going to still continue to win because authoritarianism doesn't need consensus. It simply needs partisanship and indifference. And so let's get to the details. So Reuters wants you to feel reassured. Quote, most Americans are uneasy, they say, with Trump's power grabs. But I'm not reassured. I'm alarmed because tucked inside that finding is the real story. Millions of people either endorse the grabs that Trump is making or they shrug at them. Authoritarianism doesn't need 70% to thrive. It only needs enough partisans and enough indifference. And this poll shows both. So look at the numbers they report. Roughly a third of the country is fine with putting troops in American cities to so-called fight crime, which everybody knows that's not what's happening. That's not a rounding error. A third of the population agrees with Trump on putting the National Guard into American cities, and not only the National Guard but other war departments if that's necessary. So that is enough people to have a governing coalition for domestic militarization. And when you ask about letting a president reach into the economy, leaning on the Fed, tugging at corporate boardrooms, the support isn't zero there either. It shouldn't even register if the civic immune system were healthy. Instead, it registers in double digits. Meanwhile, Trump's approval sits in the low 40s, or in this case, right below 40. And the fact of the matter is that with that number of people, he has a steady, durable group which will insulate his party identity. And that's not fringe, that's a foundation. He has enough people to have a foundation to work from. And don't comfort yourself by thinking, quote, that the unsure crowd in this is going to help us out. Because it is the unsure people who don't know what the fuck to think that get us into trouble. Because in a companion slice of polling that they had out, when the question was whether to send troops into DC streets, a big swath either backed it or couldn't say. That can't say is how democracy softened before they crack. When the question is naked power and the answer is just, I don't know. This is why I keep saying that Trump is a symptom of the disease, not the disease. The disease is a public that has grown comfortable with the executive shortcuts, partisan exceptionalism, and the fantasy that strongman tactics will only be used on the people that you fear. The disease is a media ecosystem that reframes creeping authoritarianism as ratings-friendly debate and a political class that treats the attack on checks and balances as just another message. The disease is civic illiteracy weaponized by those who know exactly what they're doing. They are taking over America. They are dismantling democracy. They're putting authoritarianism in place, and they will govern by strongman tactics. So yes, the polls do show that a majority are uneasy, but read the subtext. A durable minority actively wants rule by edict, and an elastic middle is waiting to see how all the shit plays out. That's how norms die. It's by accommodation. If you're still telling yourself that, quote, real America would never sign away the republic, look again. The signatures are already there and the ink is drying. Democracy isn't saved by vibes. It's saved by a citizenry that refuses impunity, refuses militarized spectacle, and refuses to hand any president the keys to the whole machine. If you want a headline that tells the truth, it's this. Americans are divided about power because too many Americans want it welded against their enemies, not restrained by the law for everyone. And that's the bottom line. The MAGA cast wants Trump to wield power on their behalf. They want him to destroy a multiracial democracy so that no viewpoints other than white male Protestant are going to get through. They don't realize that Trump is going to also use it against them if they are poor, if they are women, and if they don't fit with inside his idea of what a real American should look like. So this is what's happening. And that's rot from the inside out. And unless we name it and counter-organized against it, polls like this won't be warnings. They'll just be explanations for how we lost democracy. All right, let's go on to the next story here. And this one is when the sanctuary is the crime scene. And so we're going to get in a story about another police raid on a so-called church facility. And a pastor from that same church who was arrested on multiple child sex offenses. So it's just spare me, the pious language. If you are a church and your church runs on alias identities, GI Bill scams, straw buyer real estate scams, and a pastor indicted for sex crimes, you're not a house of God. You are a criminal enterprise with hymnals. So let's start in Georgia. The FBI and local deputies didn't raid a soup kitchen. They hit a 7-bed, 8-bath Westlake mansion and arrested the leader of House of Prayer, a group former members and authorities described as a cult targeting veterans. The man calling himself Ronnie Dennis, federal authorities say that name is stolen. They said it's an identity that he allegedly lifted in 1983 to become a U.S. citizen. Before he started planting churches near military bases and building a network that critics say bled veterans of their benefits. This is not a rumor, by the way. It's in the charging papers and the station's own reporting as well. Now, the indictment sketches a scheme funnel GI Bill money through a seminary, that is a school for people who want to be theologians, and have little or no instructions whatsoever, and then pressure members into arranged marriages and divorces, and then run a straw buyer real estate play with VA loans and rake in millions in rent while wrecking the congregants' credit scores. So that's what they did. And all that was staged from an estate that was listed near $2 million. That's not a ministry, it's a racketeering with scriptural footnotes. And that's not just the only issue. Because a day later, a House of Prayer pastor, Bernardell Simontax, was indicted on child sex offenses. He was indicted on enticement of a minor, sexual abuse of a minor, transporting obscene material to a minor, and child pornography counts. The same network, but different lines of abuse. One side is stealing money from veterans, and the other side is raping children. When spiritual authority is unaccountable and surveillance runs inward while money flows upward, you get this double helix of exploitation, the body and the bank account. What do these stories prove? Not that every church is corrupt, but that too many churches are architected like cartels, top-down control, coerced isolation from family, obedience rituals that break resistance, and legal moat built from the First Amendment deference. Wrap that in the tax privileges we hand out to religious entities, and you've designed the perfect cover, a sanctuary that shields the shepherd while the flock is shorn and taken for all they have. And please note the targeted selection. These operators set up shop near military bases and marketed Bible colleges to veterans whose benefits could be harvested. This isn't pastoral care, it's predation calibrated to federal payment streams. The alleged GI Bill grift was the point, not the accident. When your seminary has little to no instruction and veteran benefits are exhausted into church accounts, you don't need a theology degree to see the theology at work. It's money is their God. That's the theology. And I don't need the Bible to tell me what's right here. The receipts do. Raids, indictments, a mansion, stolen identity, a pipeline from uniform to pulpit to bankruptcy court. That's not a spiritual crisis. It's organized crime draped in sacred language. If this were a street gang, we would be saying RICO without blinking an eye because it's a church we whisper alleged and wait for the next victim to find the courage to leave or to speak out. Now, churches love to call themselves, quote, houses of prayer, fine. But when the feds cart boxes and a pastor is hauled out on sex charges, it's time to retire the euphemism. If your sanctuary functions like a syndicate, I'm going to call it what it is and demand the state do the same. My people deserve faith communities that heal, not hierarchies that harm. And if that offends the sensibilities of professional holy men, then they can take it up with their accountants and their attorneys. The rest of us are done subsidizing criminal piety. So go fuck off if you want to defend these motherfuckers. All right, that is it for that story. Let's go ahead on to the next and final story for our Unmasking the News this week. And this one is a good news story. And we're going to be talking about Jamari Bogan. So this is some news that actually bends toward progress. So Jamari Bogan, once a standout running back at Western Michigan, has turned discipline on the field into discipline in the field, community development. As founder of Bogan Development, he isn't chasing quick flips. He's taking on the hard stuff, brownfields and formerly redlined blocks in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and putting real dollars behind the rhetoric. According to Black Enterprise's profile, his firm has already moved more than $2.5 million into projects designed to revive neglected neighborhoods and widen access, not just returns. That's not charity, that is strategy for shared prosperity. Now, Bogan's trajectory is intentional. He started early, launching an investment venture in college to learn capital and networks, and now partners with the city of Kalamazoo on redevelopment in the Northside neighborhood, including the Zone 32 project. The philosophy is simple. The built environment should serve the people who live in it, especially in places starved by past policy. That's why his, quote, wins are measured in renewed blocks, livable homes, and neighborhood amenities, not just pro forma statements. And he's not operating as a lone hero. He shows up on boards that shape the next generation's opportunities. WMU's Athletics Advisory Board and the university's Foundation Real Estate Committee, because pipelines matter, and that's why he's doing it. In an industry where Black and Hispanic developers represent a vanishing slice of the pie, he's widening the lane while proving the model. Community first projects can be investable, repeatable, and dignifying. And this is what I mean when I say we're a civilization, not a brand. Bogan is building business, yes, but the business is building people. If you want evidence of hope, it looks like this: capital aimed at the commons projects that heal policy wounds, and a developer who treats community impact as a non-negotiable part of the bottom line. That's good news worth repeating. And that has been our Unmasking the News. And as always, stay woke, stay fighting, and stay free. Now we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will finish up this week with strategies for Black power, where we're going to talk about Black unity, not uniformity. And then next week we will come back with a segment of Bible study with an atheist. All right, here's the break, and when we come back, we'll talk about strategies for Black power. All right, welcome back. And welcome to Strategies for Black Power. And this week, what we're going to talk about is unity, not uniformity. And so we kind of introduced this topic in the beginning with a quote from Zora and Neale Hurston. And so I want to continue with the topic of Black diversity versus unity. And how I'm thinking about it this week is what we're going to go through today for strategies for Black power. So when I say unity, I'm not asking anybody to trade in their fingerprints for a barcode. I'm talking about something sharper, an agreement on destination without a mandate on uniform dress, uniform doctrine, or uniform tone. Black unity is not uniformity. And what that means is that we move together because the outcome we seek is non-negotiable, even as our routes, our rhythms, and our reasons differ. Now, Hurston's exasperated love, my people, names the real plurality of our house. I'm staying with that spirit, but I'm not building a shrine to sameness. I'm building a coalition that can actually win. So let's take a look at our history as an example. So every time we confuse charisma for strategy, we stall. Ella Baker warned us about that 60 years ago. Her call for, quote, group-centered leadership wasn't a cute turn of phrase. It was an opening principle. Strong people don't need to be smoothed into shape. They don't need to be dragged behind one savior. They need structures that let many competent hands steer. Baker's point was simple. Movements collapse when they require uniformity of thought and personality. They endure when ordinary people share power, set the agenda, and do the work together. Malcolm X is in the heat of 1964 said the quiet part out loud. He said, we can debate our differences in private, but when we face the machinery that is crushing us, we submerge those differences and move as a block. That's not erasing who we are as individuals, that's sequencing. There is a time to argue theology and ideology. There is a time to register, litigate, strike, purchase, and vote in concert together. Malcolm's challenge was unity of purpose across religious and political lines because the enemy didn't care what we called ourselves. It cared that we were black and organized. And unity without uniformity also has a cultural dimension. Stuart Hall reminds us that identity isn't a museum exhibit. It is a production, unfinished, argued over, remixed. If identity is always in motion, then demanding uniformity is a demand to lie about who we are. Real unity makes room for the in-process nature of our culture and still insists on shared outcomes. What are they? Safety, health, wealth, knowledge, and power. In other words, unity is honest about difference. Uniformity is dishonest about everything. And the struggle shapes the culture, not the other way around. Frantz Fanon called national culture a living practice forged in resistance, not a folklore curated for tourists. If culture emerges from collective action, then our unity is strongest when it is expressed as institutions, budgets, and laws, not just aesthetics or hashtags. Build the clinic and the credit union. Win the contract and the court case. Train the apprentices and the coders. That's culture with teeth. And yes, the Nguzo Saba belongs in this conversation as well. Not as holiday slogans as part of Kwanzaa, but as design constraints. Umoja, unity, sets the direction, and Kujichagulia, self-determination, protects our right to define those terms. Ujima and Ujamaa, collective work and responsibility and cooperative economics, tell us how we carry the load and circulate the dollar. Nia, purpose, locks us on outcomes, and Kuumba, creativity, keeps us innovating, and Amani, stripped of its supernatural, becomes a disciplined trust in our people and our process. My people, my people. Treat these principles as an engineering spec for the community we're building, not as a once-a-year recital. And on the political side of the ledger, Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton reframed Black Power as a work of building leverage, institutions, and coalitions that let us bargain from a position of strength, not plead from a posture of need. That is unity as strategy, and it requires blocks, not clones. It requires coordination, not conformity. And on the economic side, Amos Wilson, through his through line through the whole thing, is still the assignment. Without organized economic capacity, ownership, principles, pipelines, capital, and community control, everything else is performance. You cannot sustain unity on inspiration alone. You sustain it on institutions that pay the bills and protect the people. That's not a call for sameness. It is a call for infrastructure. If you are looking for the textbook, it's Amos Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power. Dense, practical, and unapologetic about linking economics to every other domain of power. And then there's Audre Lorde, who adds the ethical difference. Differences is not a threat to be managed, but a resource to be recognized, to be accepted, and yes, celebrated. The refusal to face difference honestly is what fractures community. The courage to face it is what makes unity meaningful. If we want a coalition that lasts, it has to be built to hold grief and argument, faith and atheism, queer and straight, street and sweet. Otherwise, it's not unity, it's just a fucking costume. So here's the stance. I don't need you to sound like me, vote like me every time, or worship or not worship like me at all. I need you to be clear about the scoreboard, and I need you to engage locally, materially, repeatedly. Unity means we align on the metrics that matter, and we hold one another accountable for moving them. It means that we kill the cult of the one true way, and we replace it with a disciplined polyphony of organizers organizing, builders building, litigators litigating, investors investing, teachers teaching, healers healing, and skeptics like me testing the claims so we don't drift into magical thinking. That's how a people as diverse as ours acts like a people, not by wearing the same mask, but by pulling in the same direction. Black unity is not uniformity, not because sameness is impossible, but because it's undesirable. We are a civilization, not a brand. Our power comes from harmonizing differences into momentum by design and on purpose with the motherfucking receipts. And so let's get to some strategies that we can execute as it relates to these strategies for Black power. First up is unity of purpose, not sameness. So we want to define small, non-negotiable set of outcomes: ownership, safety, health, knowledge, civic power, and judge everything by movement on that scoreboard. Methods can and should differ, but whether or not we are making progress should be measurable. As an example, one of the things that we can measure is the wealth and the income gap. Are the things that we doing causing that gap to close, or is it continuing to widen? Are the health disparities, are they coming closer together, or are they widening? Is our level of literacy gaining or static, et cetera, et cetera? We have to be focused on the purpose and the outcomes, and let the tactics come from whoever has a good idea. And then next, there is the strategy of polycentric, group-centered leadership. And so we replace charismatic bottlenecks. And quite frankly, I put even people like Martin Luther King into that category. But we replace that with federated networks with guilds of practice, so many competent hands can steer and no one capture point can be hijacked. So when Malcolm X was murdered, that pretty much put an end to his movement. When Dr. King was murdered, that really slowed down and broke the momentum of his movement. When we are relying on one charismatic leader, we put ourselves in jeopardy. What we need are guilds. What we need are groups of like-minded individuals as it relates to what we talked about before, unity of purpose, but who all can lead and have many different practices and competencies, so that we can't have one hijacked. We can't have them take out one person that stops our whole movement. And then next up is economic base as the function of power. Treat cooperative economics, capital formation, and control of procurement as the foundation that sustains cultural, legal, and political leverage, not an afterthought. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, as Dr. Amos Wilson said in his book, Blueprint for Black Power, the core of what we do has to be economics. It has to be, because we cannot, for example, even build a group that can defend us, a defensive militia group, unless we have capital. We can't teach our people unless we have capital. We can't build clinics to serve our people unless we have capital. So capital has to be a fulcrum. It has to be the engine that we use to lift everything else. And so we can't treat economics as an afterthought in what we're doing. It has to be one of the core parts of what we do. And then we move on to principled pluralism and accountability. So we have to make differences a resource, not a threat. And that's what Audre Lorde talked about a lot. Intersectionality, and especially intersectionality within the Black race. For example, there are a lot of Black men, especially, who reject LGBTQAI+, especially trans. But if you are going to cut off part of us, then you have limited our ability. We need to have everybody, straight, gay. We need, and I'm an atheist, but if we have some people who are focused on the purpose, the outcomes, and they are believers but have a good idea about how to move us forward and it's working, I will work with them. I am not trying to eliminate all of the people who aren't like me. I'm trying to organize all of us into a group that can make us all powerful. So, principled pluralism and accountability. And so we want to enforce clear standards for truth, and we want to repair our groups when there is harm, and we want to make them make consequences so unity is built on trust and not just on performance-based politics. And lastly, I'll end with this, which is anti-fragile, which is something that I'm working deeply on. I'm actually writing a book on the topic, which will hopefully be coming out in maybe 2 or 3 months from now. And I'm combining that with Pan-African coordination. So what does that mean? We want to link local struggles to diaspora-wide learning loops. We want diversified approaches and iterate under stress so the system strengthens when tested. And so what am I talking about there? So what I'm looking at, and if you are looking at this on YouTube, you see the bullets on the screen. On the left-hand side are safety nets. What we need clinics. We need eviction defense. We need food banks, etc. Those kinds of things. That is where we put the majority of our effort, 80 to 90% of our effort in that. But on the right-hand side, we want to take a look at this from a moonshot perspective, the AI upskilling in our community, advanced manufacturer diaspora corridors. We want to put 10 to 20% into things that don't cost a lot to get involved in, but if they hit big, the returns are huge, and they can start to feed what we have available for that left side, that left hand. And so that's what we need to look at, and we need to make it Pan-African in structure. So we need to work both with our people in the United States. We need to work with all the people in the countries in Africa, and we need to work with Black people who are in any part of the diaspora across the world. So we want to build stress-tested systems that improve under pressure. So Detroit to Dakar, Kingston to Chicago, learning loops that builds us up, all of us up over time. That's what we're looking at. So I'm going to end the segment this week with this. My people, my people. That is it for this week's Strategy for Black Power. It is about unity, not uniformity. It is about strength in diversity. It is about us coming together under one common purpose or common purposes, and to be able to look at a universal lens of metrics or of outcomes that we are seeking to make happen, and to judge all of our efforts in that light. If we are moving the needle in the right direction, regardless of who you are and what you are, then we're doing the right thing. If we're not, then we take that feedback and we make some changes and we go in a different direction. All right, that is it for this week's segment of Strategies for Black Power. And for basically our episode this week, since, as I said, I'm going to alternate between Bible study and Strategies for Black Power. So this week, no Bible study. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have reflections and call to action. All right, welcome back, and welcome to the segment of Reflections and Call to Action. And so we'll go on and talk about what did we learn this week. So this week we drew a clean line from Hurston's cry, my people, to the hard architecture of power. Hurston's point was never sentimental or sentiment, it was design. We are plural by nature, kin by choice, and powerful only when we refuse to be flattened into a single, quote, acceptable, end quote, silhouette. That matters because the forces arrayed against us are not confused. A captured Supreme Court is busy converting movement ideology into doctrine, and a critical slice of the public is either cheering or shrugging at the executive overreach. And too many churches are masquerading as sanctuaries while operating like cartels or syndicates. That's the ecosystem that we are under. Law bent to politics, culture bent to control, and piety bent to profit. And yet, the counter story is here too. Jamari Bogan isn't building for applause, he's building assets, proof that our communities can be renovated without displacement, and capital can be disciplined to serve the commons. This is the grammar of real progress, budgets, bylaws, and bodies that show up. Unity without uniformity is how we scale it. Group-centered leadership over charismatic bottlenecks, cooperative economics over celebrity philanthropy, and Pan-African logistics over parochial pride. We don't need a new savior. We don't need a new Malcolm or a new Martin. We need interoperability, interoperable institutions, and a scoreboard that tells the fucking truth. So this lesson is simple and adult. Stop waiting for fairness from people. Invest it in your weakness. Organize across differences, measure what matters, and convert outrage into infrastructure. We are not a brand, we are a civilization. Act like it, my people, my people. So what must we do? Lock unity to outcomes. Commit your organizations to shared power dashboard, ownership, safety, health, literacy, civic leverage, and judge every program by momentum on these metrics. So if you have a group of people that you're coming together, look at, identify those things that you intend to act upon, and then measure on a regular basis whether or not your actions are moving us in the right direction. And then build polycentric power. Replace personality cults with federated tables and guilds of practice, legal guilds, health guilds, media, and tech guilds that share playbooks across cities. And all right, let's go ahead and get to the closing. So I do want to take a brief kind of detour as we close and talk about something that I had mentioned earlier in the podcast, but that we didn't get to. And that was when I was talking about some of this whataboutism and this false equivalency that we're hearing in the news right now. Specifically, what I was referring to is the killing of Charlie Kirk. Now, I didn't go over that as one of the news elements in the podcast this week, but I did write a blog article about it that you can see on my website, which is at rationalblackthought.com. Now, the problem that I have with the way that this is playing out is that all of the so-called experts on the news are saying things like both sides of this argument need to tone down the rhetoric. Trump has come out and blatantly didn't say both sides. He has said that rhetoric from the left is what caused Charlie Kirk's murder, which couldn't be further from the truth. There's only one side in this equation that is pushing this ideology of violence, and that is the right side, or the MAGA side, as I should say, to be more correct. Now, what I want to do is just quickly go over to my website, and I'm just going to, as we close out, kind of go through. It's a brief blog article, so I'm going to read the blog article. You can see more blog posts at, again, rationalblackthought.com. But let's go ahead now and take a look at what I had to say there so you can see what I'm referring to. So there you can see on the screen what I posted. And so the title is Political Violence, Charlie Kirk, and the Truth We Cannot Ignore. And here's the blog post. Let me be clear from the start. Political violence has no place in a functioning democracy. If ballots are to mean anything, bullets cannot be the way disputes are settled. But the United States is not a functioning democracy. It is a backsliding one. We are living in a moment where democratic norms are shredded daily, where authoritarianism is treated not as a danger, but as a legitimate governing option. In such a climate, political violence is not a shocking aberration. It is a natural consequence of democratic decay. The murder of Charlie Kirk today underscores this uncomfortable truth. I will not dance around the fact of his killing. He was gunned down. And if you saw the video, there is a video out there of the actual shooting. It is horrific. And that is a tragedy in the most basic sense, because violence corrodes whatever remains of civil society. But let us resist the temptation to romanticize the man simply because he is dead. Death does not launder a life of bigotry. Charlie Kirk was a racist. He was a homophobe. He was a peddler of religious intolerance. His entire career was built on stoking division, spreading lies, and weaponizing Christianity as a blunt instrument of political hate. He was not a defender of democracy. He was an advocate for its destruction. He was not a friend to freedom. He was an enemy of equality. He was not a moral man. He was an opportunist who cloaked himself in morality to justify the oppression of others. To say this is not to endorse his killing. Quite the opposite. It is to insist that we do not sanitize his record simply because he has become a victim of the same violence his movement normalized. In fascist states, violence is not the exception. It is the rule. And the political ecosystem that Kirk cultivated and celebrated is one that thrives on violence, whether directed against immigrants, LGBTQ plus people, or anyone who dared to dissent. So let us be consistent. Yes, reject the killing. Political murder is corrosive, destabilizing, and ultimately anti-human. But do not rewrite history. Kirk's death does not transform him into a hero, a martyr, or a good man. He was who he was before the bullet, and the bullet did not wash away his legacy of hate. The lesson here is not that Kirk deserves sainthood in death, but that America is sliding into the very conditions where violence becomes predictable. When democracy falters, when fascism advances, violence ceases to be a breakdown of the system. It becomes its operating principles. And if we want to stop political violence, the solution is not sanctifying men like Kirk. The solution is rebuilding democracy to dismantle fascism and to tell the truth about who these figures were in life, not invent fairy tales about them in death. And so getting back then to our closing, if you have any comments about that or any other part of the show, please send me a note to feedback@rationalblackthought.com. If you're checking this out on YouTube, then you can leave a comment there. If you are checking it out on YouTube, make sure that you hit the like button, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and also make sure that you hit the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode. If you're checking this out on the audio only version, then you can send a feedback to feedback@rationalblackthought.com. As I said, also check out the new website, which is rationalblackthought.com. Website's been there for a while, but I just recently worked on it and made some changes to it. I'd like to remind you the intro music that we played in the beginning was was Transcend by KIRK. The outro music that you'll hear during the outro is Ending by Micaiah Beats. Like I said, this podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Google, Stitcher, Amazon, YouTube, and other platforms. But if it's not on a platform where you typically consume your podcast material, just send me an email and I'll get it there. Make sure you subscribe and leave me a 5-star review. And I'd like to leave you with these words from Frederick Douglass. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want, or those who profess, let me start over. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without the thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. All right, thanks for listening, everyone. And the main takeaway that I want everyone to have from the podcast this week is that we need to operate with not one purpose, but with purpose, under purpose. And that we need to have a clear idea of our outcomes and objectives that we seek. And we need to understand the metrics that measure our progress in the direction of those outcomes. And then as we get together to work together across the diaspora and across the different types of people that we have within the Black community, then we can begin to solidify what is working, what's moving us in the right direction, and to consolidate on that. So thanks again, everyone, for listening, and I'll be back next week. And next week, again, will be our week for Bible study with an atheist. So instead of strategies for Black power. So look forward to that. I already have a good Bible study written. I think you're going to like it. So we'll catch you next week on the flip side. Take care.